Okay, let's talk about languages. First time we did it basically on a form by form level. And I don't know his name. Urepom is his GitHub address from France. Came up with a much better idea of just using string tables, individual global string tables for the different languages. And what these look like is you have a key or a reference and then to a phrase. So this is the English one, and this is the French one, antennae, that sort of thing. And then you also have like a German one. But those are pretty complicated to try to edit them individually. So there is a plugin called Resource Manager that gives you all the languages that you have and the neutral one, in this case it's English, and the key, and you can edit these all at once. And you can export it as an Excel file. That's how the file you see. Previously was on just a public one. I'm not going to do that anymore. But that allows you then to change all the languages at once and see everything at once. And in the red just means that there's no translation. If there's no translation, then it just uses the default. So that's the way the resource file works. The advantage of that is before there was like one for every form, but then there was a different one of these languages, and there were 7 languages. There were 7 different resource files for each form. So 7 times 7 times 7, it became many, many, many resource files. And this way there will be just one resource file per language. And much simpler, much faster to compile. So how does this work? So when we have we do something simple here. When we type in pass, the word pass in this label, over here in the text, we type in pass. Now that's all fine and dandy. That's our default language. Now this is a label. And after we've created the whole form, then what we do is we substitute the text in the label with, this is the name of our resource file, gstring, and our word or our key is gs_pass, which in English is pass number, and in German is Durchgang. So when it loads the appropriate one, depending on whether you choose German or French or Italian or whatever. It is smart enough to pick the German resource file and load the translation, this one here, and stick that in the label. So then you have to do that for all the different labels and all the buttons and everything. And of course, there's hundreds of them, and that takes a bit of time. But once they're done once. And then, like I say, the advantage is now these individual language files, there's just one of them. So that makes it a lot easier. Well, nothing in language is easier, but that is the way it works. So then when you run the program, it fills in the text with the right language. Okay, so this is the German one. And in Germany, you use a comma for a decimal and decimal for a comma as opposed to the default. So this is when it gets interesting. Now, when we click on here, we have 0,6. This is our separator. So we click that, it comes up with a comma. Now, when we parse, we can't use culture invariant, meaning no culture, because then this would parse to a 6. And 6 doesn't, because it would ignore the decimal. Or in this case, the comma is the decimal, or the decimal separator, as they call it. So when we click 3,5, then that's 3.5. And so that needs to parse out as 3.5 and not 35. So how do we do that? So we have to do that right back into the keypad design. You can see here's a decimal. And that's wrong if it came up for German or for French, as opposed to English. We want a decimal. And for French, we want a comma. So how do you do that? You can't put it in here because there's just the functions for the button clicks. In the designer itself is all of these individual lines to build buttons. And so what we do, here's the decimal button is the name of the button. So what we do is we use the system threading current culture, number format, number decimal separator. And this is based on our current culture that we've set. In this case, DE. So DE knows that the number separator is the comma. So when we run the thing, instead of making a decimal, we put up a comma. So that's starts right in the control itself. The keypad itself, when we build a keypad, it's still a decimal. So then how does the numeric form use this? Remember, our numeric form has decimals and commas and that sort of thing, and comes up with a decimal, but we know now that changes based on the culture. And when we are substituting, we substitute not a decimal point, but we also substitute the number decimal separator based on the culture. So that when it parses the number, where is parsing? Down here, when we hit OK, then we parse based on our current culture and a culture invariant, like an NMEA. That's what a culture invariant means. It just ignores it. A decimal is a decimal, and that's all there's to it. But since we're using different cultures, we need to take that into consideration. So when we parse it, if our culture uses a comma, we parse with a comma in it. We need to first put in that comma instead of a decimal and do everything right in the first place. So that's kind of the trick with languages. It is complicated, and there's going to be a few errors until we get some of this sorted out. So we're going to start with French and just German and English and figure out some of these, because it is kind of complicated. So anyway, I just thought I'd let you know what's going on with languages. Okay, thanks.